Hey guys, I'm Shaheen, and this is the Chapter 6 presentation for our Python programming course. Like every single other presentation I've done so far, I have an agenda, and I want to talk about the key terms that we went over in this chapter. And I left those in bold, and I gave brief descriptions of the rest. So if you ever want, you can pause and go back and view them. I've also put some visuals, not as many this time as usual, but feel free to pause and go through those as well if they help with the understanding of the content. Introduction of functions. The whole slide is pretty important here because it's the foundation of everything, but I'll talk about a few of these bolded terms, but I would highly recommend you understand all this content before moving on to the rest of the content from this chapter. A function is a reusable block of code that performs a specific task. A function definition is declaring a function using def and defining its behavior. A function call is executing a function to perform its task. A return statement sends a value back to the caller, and functions without returns default to none. And I'll leave the rest for you to go through after. But it's very important content because the whole chapter is kind of based around the idea of understanding how to produce and use the functions. These are a couple visuals of what functions would look like, and the arrows are meant to guide you for the different aspects. If we look down here at the bottom right image, we can see that it defines each of the following things. This is how you define the function. This is the function name. These are the arguments that go into the parentheses of the function, which are going to be the inputs for that function. Then you have the actual function code here, the print statement and the return statement. And when we look at the top left image over here, it's showing a more simplified version of producing a function, defining it ahead of time, and then calling the function after, which runs the program that is embedded within the function you produced earlier. And then it goes down to the bottom where it has this print statement. Function scope and variable visibility. Scope determines where a variable can be accessed. Local variables are variables defined inside of a function, and they're accessible only within that function. Global variables are declared outside of all functions, and they're accessible globally at any point throughout the script. Scope resolution is the order in which Python looks up variable names, and the function locals returns a dictionary of the current local symbol table. For the focus of this presentation, I wanted to talk about dynamic typing versus static typing. So this is a pretty important slide for the content that I'm choosing to emphasize. Dynamic typing is where Python allows variables to change types at runtime. Static typing, other languages like C, require explicit type declarations, where you have to emphasize the type that you're regarding. Differences between dynamic and static typing. Flexibility versus strict type enforcement is the only comparison between the two. And functions as objects. Functions can be assigned to variables, passed as arguments, and returned from other functions. And polymorphism is the ability of functions to work with different data types. Zylab's activity 6.22.1, swapping variables, it states, define a function named swapValues that takes four integers as parameters and swaps the first with the second, and the third with the fourth values. Then write a main program that reads four integers from input, calls function swapValues to swap the values, and prints the swapped values on a single line separated with spaces. There's an example of the inputs given here, and it says function swap values returns and the main program outputs this given line here. So I'm going to give you an example of the code in the next slide. In this slide, this is the code that I produced to satisfy the requirements of that given Zylab's assignment. I defined a function swap values where the inputs, the parameters of the function, are user val1, user val2, user val3, and user val4. In that function, the return statement returns user val2, comma, user val1, comma, user val4, comma, user val3. The order was important in this case. And then here, where it says if name equals main, it's specifying, it's just making an if statement that will run. In this case, it runs a script prior to this that will produce a true if statement that will do the following things. It'll set val1 to an integer input, val2 to another integer input, and so on for val3 and 4. And then within that same if statement, there's a variable named swapped values, where I ran the swapped values function up top. This is called a function call, and gave it the parameters that we just defined as the variables in this if statement into the swapped values function call. And after it, I printed the swapped values using an unpacking variable. That's what the asterisk was for, so as to print each of the terms within swapped values as a list. In arguments and flexibility, pass by argument, Python assigns references affecting mutability. Mutable versus immutable states that lists and dictionaries can be modified inside a function, but strings and tuples cannot be, hence mutable versus immutable. Keyword arguments and default values. Named arguments allow flexibility, and default values prevent missing arguments. Talking about unpacking, this is the continued slide. Multiple function outputs and unpacking. Functions can return multiple values as tuples and unpack them. For this slide, it's not as important, but it's more of a lifestyle benefit. So it's good to be able to produce readable functions and make sure that they're not redundant and they run in bits and pieces so that it makes sense as you go along to understand the functions of that particular function. And this is the continuation of that slide, talking about how you should be careful when it comes to errors and copy pasting programs, because they're not always going to be the same. Hopefully my mic didn't cut out too much. Thank you for watching.